Hey everyone, this is Mark. I'm just going to cover a quick video on the S-chassis subframe swap for Z31. So you might be asking yourself, like why would you do something like this? It's pretty involved. It's not cheap. Well, when you lower your car, the Z31 subframe can only go so far with adjustability. It just has those little eccentric bolts that you adjust for tow and camber. And if you lower your car any more than like a couple inches, it gets a lot of negative camber, and you can't really fix it. I mean, you can do some stuff to slot out the holes and stuff, but other than that, there gets to be a point where it's not gonna be factory alignment. If you're making more power and you need, beefier axles, a beefier differential, although the R200 is pretty beefy, you'd be hard pressed to try to break one. You'll break your axles or your axle stubs before you break the diff for sure. It has more rear brake options. It's easier to get, dual caliper setups and things like that. There's more aftermarket support, more gear ratios. I mean, a lot of these vehicles came with these multi-link style subframes, like the S chassis, the S13, S14, S15, the Skylines, like the R32, R33, the Z32, the Q45, the Infiniti J30. They all had these kinds of multi-link rear subframes. So it's a lot of aftermarket support for them. So for a subframe swap kit, this is going to be, you're probably going to want to buy one of these if you're going to try to do this. It makes it a lot easier. This one from Response Type has these rear mounting pins, and then these front little sleeves go over your front mounts, and you kind of weld up the front of your subframe to these pins, and it makes all 4 mounting points. It's $162, pretty cheap. The option I went with is this one from Pass Power, and it's more expensive. It's $250, but it's got more stuff in here. So it's got the rear pins. It even has this locator. So if you're using an S13 subframe or even an S14 subframe with S13 conversion mounts, like I did, because the pins on the S14 are a little further out, just a hair. So you can use subframe conversion mounts and use this kit, and it'll be a lot easier. So yeah, you just bolt this underneath your car, and it'll locate the pins where they need to go. These are all for the front. You cut your front mounts on your S-chassis subframe off, and here, I'll show you. You kind of cut right here, and then you can make your own mounts out of with this. You make your own front mounts. It's pretty easy. It's just time consuming. So for the different subframes, I use an S14. You can see I had to cut here, here, and here, and then boxed them in and painted them. If you have an S13, there's an extra spot you have to cut into the body to notch it for the lower control arm mount on the front. It hits the body over here. You see, I had a picture up. Yeah, right here. Down here, you have to cut that out. So that's something to consider. An S14, you just have to cut out these two. S13, you have an extra one. So it's just a little more time consuming. And then here's my S14 subframe underneath my car. It's got all the adjustable arms, so it can literally get camber down to 0, tow down to 0, no matter how much I lower the car. So I would recommend an S13 or S14. This guy right here, he used a Z32 subframe, and you can see how wide it is. I mean, the Z32 twin turbo subframe would be great if it fit nice under our car, because it has the R230 differential, which is really strong, and it's got those 32 spline axles. But I mean, you can see how wide it is. Now you could put fender flares on here or something and fix that, but it's just something to consider. Most people use the S13 or S14 subframe. Yeah, so for differential options, the S13, you can use your stock diff. That is not a great option if you're making good, decent amount of power. Those differentials are okay, but the axles on the S13, S14, they're pretty weak. They don't hold that much power. A lot of people use the Infinity J30 differential. If you use that one, you might have to swap your differential cover. But they use these weird 5-bolt axles that only that and these Z32 NA use. And they're okay. They hold a decent amount of power. Nothing crazy, but and then obviously the other option is the Z32 NA differential. Also uses those 5-bolt axles like the Infinity J30. But your strongest option, if you're making a lot of power, is going to be the Q45. That's 1996 to 1990. Q45 Infinity. That differential will bolt right up to an S13 or S14. You don't have to modify anything. For the S13 you have to swap diff covers, but for the S14 it'll bolt right up. That's the strongest bolt-on option for the S13. And that uses 6x1 axles. So it's 6 holes. They're all evenly spaced, not like the S13 that has 6x2 where 2 bolts are next to each other and has 3 sets of those. But yeah, that's going to be your strongest option if you're using an S13. If you're using an S14, I'd recommend using a Z or a G diff, like a 350Z, 370Z, or G35, G37. You could see all these ratios that are available. And you can actually even use, I think it's like an 07, around that, 04 to 07 Nissan Pathfinder. It has an even lower ratio, so you can go 3.13, 3.35, 3.54, 3.69. This one even has a 3.9 available, but they're pretty hard to find. The Nismo diff and the convertible manual diff. But yeah, you see all these options here, and these diffs are, they're really easy to find. They're all over the junkyards. I got one for like $150. I actually got, where is it? I think I got this one right here. It's a 2008 G37 with a manual transmission. So this is the ratio I'm using right now, and it's got a viscosious. These are all viscosious limited slip differentials, except the Nismo. That one might be clutch, I'm not sure, but the viscosious locks up okay. It's pretty good. It's not going to be as good as a clutch type, and as the fluid heats up in the differential, it's not going to lock up as well, but still it's pretty good for most people. And yeah, if you have the S14 subframe, you can use these diffs. There's a conversion mount to use them. Here they are, these guys. So these go in the front. This is for the back cover, and it will bolt right up, as you can see. So that's a 350Z diff and a S14 subframe. So this is my personal recommendation, getting an S14 subframe if you can find one. They're a little harder to find, using these bushings and a 350Z differential if you're making a decent amount of power. If you're not making a lot of power, you just want the handling of the multi-link subframe, then you can just use the stock diff and axles. And then with these differentials, you can use, and same with the Q45 differential, you can use 6-bolt axles. So you can use 350Z axles. You could actually use 370Z axles, although they're too long. If you use them, you might have to get all adjustable arms and kind of push your knuckle out further to fit the axle. So you might run into problems there too with your wheels rubbing on your fenders and stuff. Yeah, you can also use a driver's side Z32 twin turbo axle and a driver's side Q45 1990 to 1996 Q45 32 spline axle on the passenger side. That's what I use. So I have a Z32 twin turbo axle on the driver's side. That's a driver's side axle. And then I have the Q45 driver's side axle on the passenger side of my car. And that's a really strong setup. That's going to be the strongest setup you can get using stock parts. You can also do crazy stuff like they have an S chassis kit to put a 8.8 Ford differential in. And then obviously too, when you put these different axles in, you have to match up wheel bearings. So pretty much all the Nissan axles use a 29 spline outer wheel bearing, except the Z32 twin turbo, the Q45, and I think that's it. Those are the only two that use the and the 370Z. The 370Z uses the beefier 32 spline outer, so it needs the 32 spline wheel bearings. And you can find them on Rock Auto or Z1. They have OEM ones, but they're expensive. So for the e-brake setup, I am using a Z32. So I'm using Z32 knuckles and e-brake setup and Z32 NA 2-seater e-brake lines, e-brake cables. And I have, this is Patrick's setup, but my setup's really similar to this. It basically uses the same thing. It mounts to the differential, the front diff points, mounting points, and it just holds the cables there, and that's the stock e-brake. You kind of got to rig something up to work, and you pull your handle, it pulls this out, and it locks up your e-brake. So that this could work for the S chassis stuff too. They all use these types of cables, so you just kind of got to figure something out with this. But this is a good reference, make something like this. And the other thing to consider is these, if you're using, if you want to do this and be serious and, save weight, this is unsprung weight too, so it's like a double benefit. The Z32 or Q45 aluminum uprights, these are aluminum, are a lot lighter. The S chassis stuff is, I think it's cast iron or cast steel or something, and it's really heavy. And this mounting point for the coilover is different, so the S chassis stuff has a big stud coming off the back, and you can just bolt your coilovers right up to that. So if you use these aluminum ones, you got to use this RT track, this response type adapter. This is, I welded that up, that's custom. These are Jegs coilovers, but you get the idea. And you can find them on his website. These guys right here, they just bolt right onto the aluminum uprights. It makes it super easy to use, your Z31 or your S13 rear coilovers on the aluminum uprights. So that's nice to have. Save some weight, save unsprung weight. So should make the car handle better. And then I'll kind of go over my swap. So I just picked up an S14 subframe with a differential and axles, drive shaft. I sold all this stuff, made back some of the money. So the subframe, after selling the differential and the axles and stuff, just the bare subframe only cost me like $50. These are the S13, S14 conversion mounts. It's kind of hard to tell, but so the center would be like right here-ish, so they're a little offset. So you can bolt the S14 subframe where an S13 subframe would have went, like the mounting points for an S13 subframe. So that makes things easier. These are polyurethane GK Tech mounts. They also make solid ones if you want to go that route. These are the GK Tech solid differential bushings. I got the 2 rear mounting bushings too, because I still eventually want to get the 2 stud differential cover for the 350Z, G37, whatever. It usually just has 1 stud. And then here's kind of some of the parts I got. These are the Power Tricks adjustable arms. It's trying to burn the bushings out. I found out later you can actually just flip this differential over and just tap these out. That's a lot easier to do than trying to burn them out. And see, this is what I meant by the 6x1. So it's got 1, 1, 1, 6 of them all the way around. If you could tell from the S13, it's got 2 bolts right next to each other, then it goes over, then 2 bolts right next to each other, then 2 more bolts. So you got to be careful when you're swapping differentials, you know, making sure the axles work. So these axles work with the Z32 twin turbo differential, which is not easy to make work in one of these subframes. So unless you're using a Z32 twin turbo subframe, it'll fit the 350Z, 370Z, G35, G37 differentials. It'll fit the 90 to 96 Q45 differential. So that's good. These are the 32 spline outers. So these are really beefy. They're 32 spline. Usually, you know, most of the Nissan stuff is 29 spline. And then you can see the difference there. This is 29 spline wheel bearing, and that's a 32 spline. You can see how much bigger it is. So you have to make sure these wheel bearings match. And this is another thing I didn't consider. You have to make sure so this has a mounting tab for where the e-brake goes, and this one doesn't. So these things right here change between. So you have to make sure all that stuff matches up. And then this is kind of the process of actually swapping in the subframe. So you just put the pins in the locator bar on, just weld the pins in, and then see, you bolt this up to where the stock differential mount would be on the Z31, and it actually just locates the subframe right in the middle where it needs to be. And then you can tack it in there, cut these off, and slip them under there, because you see it kind of comes up and curves up to support the weight of that. You can see I did that. And then these C channels, these guys kind of go up in there to support all that. Then you can see where I boxed in the body, welded in plates. I used cardboard as kind of a template and made little cardboard templates, and then I use that to cut metal, just some sheet metal. It doesn't have to be anything crazy, it's just 16 gauge sheet metal. But this is the most tedious process, notching out this body. It's honestly kind of a pain, but it takes some time. It's not like it's hard to do, it just takes a lot of time. But yeah, and it's worth it. The end result looks good. Here's the front mounts. I know the welds look like crap, but you know, the subframe holds. It's very strong. I just painted it, so you can't even tell anyway. Painted the whole subframe. And then you can. This is the S13 coilover. Z31 coilovers should be the same. They just have a little sleeve in there. You take it out, and then they'll fit the S13 mounting stuff. So yeah, this is the aluminum upright, so it has this response type conversion bracket. You can see the subframe, and then figuring out how to mount these brake lines. So these are the hard lines coming to the brake line that goes to the caliper. This I cut off the stock subframe, or I actually cut it off the body. Never mind, not the subframe. I cut it off the body, the Z31 body, and I had to relocate it. So I just welded it in right here. It used to be down here somewhere. So you can see that's solid mounted, so the brake lines aren't flapping around. Definitely recommend doing that. There's the sway bar. These are the e-brake cables. So I had my arms adjusted out a little bit at first, and you can see how kind of the tire pokes. But fix that. Yeah, you can see how far out they're adjusted. Also, another thing to consider when you do this swap, you have to remake your rear exhaust, because it goes underneath the subframe instead of kind of humping over, like a little hump comes over the subframe and then out the back. So yeah, it has to go underneath the subframe. So you got to remake your exhaust from kind of around where the subframe is back. You have to remake it. Now this is when I switched out differentials to a shorter ratio. So that was a 3.36, this is a 3.69. You can see it just has the one mounting stud. It's none on this side. I put polyurethane bushings after the fact in the knuckles, and I would recommend doing that. Those bushings were pretty beat. It's a lot easier to do if you have like one of these Harbor Freight ball joint presses. Trying to do it without one of these is, I wouldn't even try it. It's such a pain. I actually used this tool and then I didn't need it anymore, so I tried returning it, and it was barely used. They took it back, so I didn't even have to. It was like I rented the tool. There's the old bushings all beat. And then this is when I switched out to these coilovers. Welded up a bracket for the top. Welded up this bracket for the bottom. So this was the Q45 response type brackets. I just cut the mounting tabs off, and this bracket I bought off Jegs. It's made for these coilovers. And just welded it up. Pretty easy. It's got the double adjustability for compression and rebound on the shock settings. And then that's it. That's where the car sits now. Looks pretty good. Put these fender flares on because I have some wide wheels in the back. But yeah. So hopefully I know it was kind of all over the place, but I tried to cover all the questions. If you have any more questions, you can feel free to comment down in the YouTube comments or message me. I'm on Facebook too, on all the Z31 groups, so you can message me there too. Alright, thanks for watching, guys. See you in the next video.